Hello everyone and welcome to Module 5. Today we are talking about the big idea. The big idea is a concept that you most likely heard about in copywriting many times. There have been dozens, if not hundreds of people in all of advertising and marketing who try to understand this concept. They call it different things like the rule of one, the big idea, the main idea, the core premise, all sorts of different things. And what I'm going to try to teach you today in this training is not a revelatory concept that is going to change everything about how you view marketing. Instead, what I'm going to try to teach you is why the big idea is so confusing and why the big idea is so out there for most people, and people try to grasp it but don't really get it. The reason I'm going to do that is because the more you understand the concept behind the big idea and why it's confusing, the better you're going to be able to implement it into your own copywriting without feeling like you're missing something, without feeling like you have to go out and figure out the hidden thing. And that's going to be my goal for this piece. So if there are questions on this piece, make sure to attend the Q&A calls and ask questions specifically about them, because it's better to get a specific idea on what you're planning in your copy for whatever piece you're writing, rather than talking big concepts around the big idea. And I'll explain why in this training. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and talk about it. So like I said, the history of the big idea is the history of marketing in general. David Ogilvy is the first one to technically call it the big idea. But before David Ogilvy was a man named Victor Schwab. And Victor Schwab was probably one of the best direct response mail order copywriters to ever live, although you may or may not have heard of him. That reason is he wrote tons and tons of headlines, tons and tons of offers for all sorts of different mailers, but it was early in the 1900s when he wrote these things. So a lot of people copied them. A lot of people brought them up in their own marketing or rehashed them or something like that. And so you're not going to hear a lot about Victor Schwab, except by the people, obviously, who were back then taking his stuff. He talked about what's called the rule of one. And the rule of one is less about the quote-unquote big idea and more about the concept of human understanding. The concept of what we're capable of learning and reading about and understanding at one time. And the rule of one is basically a rule of thumb for everything you do in copywriting, because it allows you to give the reader a sense of clarity that they don't normally have. And it kind of limits you as a copywriter to things that the reader will get, rather than just throwing a bunch of crap on top of them, a bunch of features, a bunch of benefits, a bunch of tips or tricks or modules, whatever it happens to be. The rule of one is the thing that is going to carry you forward with this big idea training, because it's going to help you refine your ideas when you're writing copy. It's also going to reduce a lot of overwhelm for you, because you don't have to write 137 different benefits if you're applying the rule of one. So let's talk about that a little bit, and then we'll bring into what Ogilvy brought into his agency and some of his big ideas for bigger clients. So the rule of one, you can start looking down this list right now and start seeing what we're talking about here, but I'm going to start with one good idea. So the rule of one essentially means a human brain, or anyone who's reading something, can really only focus on one thing at a time. And the reason for that is because we are physiologically incapable of multitasking. You might think that you can multitask, but in reality, the better you are at quote-unquote multitasking, it's really just how good you are at switching from one topic to another rapidly. Most people are very bad at that, especially when you're trying to keep someone's attention in advertising. So by applying the rule of one, you give them one thing to focus on. And when we start here, the good idea, one good idea, is you're looking for that thing that someone can grasp very quickly. You know, the thing that makes them go, aha, or the thing that makes them go, wow, I never thought about that before. Or the thing that makes them go, I am going to try that. The good idea is something that you understand when you hear it. And you get it in the context of whatever problem you're trying to solve. A good idea for an ad might be, in the fat loss niche, could be like how to lose fat without exercising. In the supplement niche, it could be the one pill you need to take to lengthen your life. You know, something to that effect, where a good idea is trying to capture the essence of the solution that you're offering without giving the solution away, obviously, if that's not the right way to do it. So when you're thinking about this in terms of the rule of one and you think about a good idea, think about it in terms of aha, or wow, or great, that's an awesome thing, or this is exactly what I need right now. That's the good idea when you're doing this. So the next one is one core emotion. We've talked about this in previous modules, the primal desire, the primal fears, the core needs, things like that. These core emotions that someone is feeling, you want to focus on just one of them. Because if you can grab the one that is most meaningful for your prospect, then you're going to capture their interest and attention rapidly and in a way that keeps it if you're actually appealing to that one emotion. So for example, if you're, again, working in the fat loss industry or working on a fat loss piece, a core emotion might be, a good example of a core emotion in fat loss would be one like, embarrassment. Embarrassment is a core emotion that goes through people's minds when they're dealing with fat loss. Another one might be pride or lost pride in some cases, where they are dealing with what they used to look like and where they currently look like in the mirror. Those are core emotions. Those are something that you can appeal to when you're dealing with a fat loss product, because you're focused on what they're feeling in the moment as it relates to your product. So the next one is one captivating story. A really good example of a captivating story can be found in most financial copy literature. Usually they lead with some sort of story. We'll look at some of the examples later on in this piece, but a captivating story for a currently running promotion for virtual reality products in the financial niche has to deal with the story of a first lieutenant in the Army who was in a catastrophic IED explosion. That's captivating for most people, especially in the context of it. You know, the 65-year-old white guy in Florida is captivated by that because they care about the soldiers, they care about America, they care about the war, things like that, and it captivates them by reading about that, about a soldier who was, you know, mortally wounded, but then use of a technology saved his life. That's captivating. If you're dealing with other industries like supplements or fat loss or relationships or even hobby industries and e-commerce, things like that, there is always a captivating story to be found when you're dealing with those products. And that's one way to use this big idea concept. The next one is one single desirable benefit. Now this is pretty hard to narrow down, but if you know what their primal desire is, then you can always correspond a benefit to your product or the solution that you're writing about to that primal desire, and that becomes your one single desirable benefit. So the one single desirable benefit for a person who's reading financial copy is often the desire for rapid gains in their financial profile or their financial portfolio. Another concept would be the single desirable benefit for relationships would be for a woman to find her soulmate, to feel validated, to feel like somebody truly understands her. This goes on and on and on. If you link the primal desire to the single most desirable benefit of your product, that can become your big idea. That can become the focal point for your entire piece. The next one is one inevitable response. So one inevitable response is basically the action you want them to take with whatever piece you're writing. If that's click, if that's give you their email, if that's buy your product, if that's buy the upsell, whatever it happens to be, come to your event, the one inevitable response is how you basically encapsulate the entire piece. You're driving them towards that one action rather than multiple actions, rather than multiple options. You focus on the one inevitable response based on all the stuff that we just covered, the good idea, the core emotion, the captivating story, and the single desirable benefit. All those things lead into one inevitable response. And that's how we keep our sales copy really, really tight, because everything we're writing pulls into all of these things. The good idea will frame the core emotion, will frame what the captivating story is all about, and will frame the single desirable benefit from all of that, which leads into the inevitable response. All of these things are incredibly important for the entire copy piece. Now, for your big idea, the actual central cornerstone of your piece, you should keep it to at least one sentence. Keep it as short as possible while still being clear and obvious. The reason I say one sentence is because it keeps that rule of one intact and forces you to put everything we just talked about, good idea, core emotion, captivating story, single desirable benefit, and inevitable response, into one sentence, or as many of those things as you can into one sentence, because that's going to force you to keep the piece tight and stop it from sprawling, and it's also going to reduce the overwhelm for you as a copywriter in writing the piece. So that's a lot of strategy. That's a lot of high-level stuff. Let's see how it's used in copy today. So let's jump into, real quick, some examples, and then we'll come back to this slide about the techniques that you can use to build a big idea. So first is brand advertising. So this is stuff that you see in big brands trying big ideas with all of their advertising. We Try Harder is one that Avis used. Now, the context behind We Try Harder is that Avis was ranked the #2 car rental company in the country. Now, you can't really fake that. You can't say we're #1 if you're literally ranked #2. So they had to go out and find a big idea that fit with where they currently were in the marketplace. And when being ranked #2 is so visceral to the audience, they have to go out and find a big idea that matches what the audience thinks about that. Like, why would you go with #2 if you can go with #1? Especially with car rentals where they're all lined up on the same block, why would you go with one versus the other, right? Why would you go with a #2 instead of #1? They ended up with We Try Harder. And the advertisement they used was focused on explaining why, because they were #2, they were forced to try harder. They had to care more. They had to work harder. They had to give you more customer service. They had to be the best that they could be because they were ranked #2. There was no other reason for you to go with them other than the fact that they were working harder than the other guy. So that encapsulated what we're talking about here. It's a good idea based on the context of where they are. It applies to a core emotion, which is the person's need for a benefit, the person's need for a deal, things like that, or a reason why. The captivating story is, wow, these #2 underdogs are working hard to get my business. The single desirable benefit is that these guys are going to take more care of me than the other guy because they try harder, and the inevitable response is, I need to try them out. And they managed to condense that into one sentence, which is, We Try Harder. The next one, and to do it in 2 words, think different. That was Apple. Think different. This is another example of a #2 company, or a company coming up behind the major leader, which was Microsoft at the time, and using their positioning as #2 to solidify who they were. Now, a resource that you guys might want to look at for all of this stuff and for marketing in general is Al Rice and Jack Trout, their book, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I would go look for that, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and read that book because it will show you kind of what you're supposed to do for big brands, and that will give you context around what these brands were doing and why they positioned themselves the way that they did. Now, I don't know if they read the book first or they were just doing this intuitively because, you know, Apple had Steve Jobs, and a lot of these guys had Ogilvy and Mather or other big agencies helping them, so they understood marketing to an extent. But when you position yourself as number 2, you're trying to use these: the good idea, the core emotion, the captivating story, the single desirable benefit, and one inevitable response to explain why someone should go with you instead of your competitor, and also explain your benefits to your prospect immediately. Think different shows how Apple wants you to view something that most people consider to be purely Microsoft, which is the personal computer, differently. And now look where they are. They've managed to convince people to think different for years, and now they're one of the most valuable companies on the planet. So the next example is pork, the other white meat, from the National Pork Board. Now, there's some really interesting, good advertising that comes out of National Pork Board, National Council, Dairy Council, National Beef Council, things like that, because they're trying to sell a commodity, but they're also trying to convince you to buy more of that commodity than other commodities while, garnering their own sales. So there's some interesting advertising to be seen there. A lot of our commonly held beliefs about nutrition in general comes from a lot of this advertising, which is really interesting if you are in the natural health space. But for the most part, it's also really interesting for copywriters because they manage to convince an entire generation, an entire country to believe a certain thing from advertising. This one here, pork, the other white meat, is basically capitalizing on the context of when they were running it. There was science and media attention around the fact that white meat was healthier than red meat. There still is sort of a scare versus red meat and white meat, but to a lesser extent. Back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, people thought that red meat was going to kill you and instantly give you a heart attack, and so they were transitioning to white meat, and it was hurting pork sales. And so the National Pork Board came out with this, pork, the other white meat. And it gives them a good idea to grab onto, a core emotion, which is health, which is longevity, because they want to be healthier eating white meat, a captivating story because they've never heard of this, it's new to them, a desirable benefit, which goes back to health and being able to eat things other than chicken, and an inevitable response, which is we should try pork. And they managed to put it all into one sentence. The next one for brand advertising that we'll talk about here is quality is job one, which is for Ford. You can see exactly what they're going for here. They want to emphasize the word quality, and they want to emphasize that it is the most important thing for their company. This was back when a lot of trucks and cars were emphasizing horsepower, emphasizing size, emphasizing all that kind of stuff. Ford went with quality. They wanted to be known for the word quality. And that gave someone a good idea to latch onto, a quality car, a core emotion, which was obviously getting the most for your money, but also protection and getting a good deal, a bargain, making sure that your money went further, all that kind of stuff. That's the core emotion. The captivating story is that Ford is focusing 100% on quality. The desirable benefit is obvious, that you get a quality car, and the inevitable response is they should try Ford. Again, one sentence. These are good examples of brand advertising, but because we're copywriters and we're not brand advertisers, let's look at some direct response. Direct response, here's some big ideas from classical advertising. The first one is the secret of making people like you. Now, how does this fit? One good idea, right? One good idea, the secret of making people like you. Everybody wants to be liked. A lot of people don't believe that they're good at making other people like them. So the good idea is that there is a secret behind making people like you, right? That's a very compelling idea for a lot of people to go with. The next one being one core emotion. Obviously, they're hitting on people's fear of other people not liking them. And the fact that there might be a secret out there that makes some people more likable than others, things like that. So as we work down the chain here, again, we notice that one good idea, one core emotion, a captivating story, a single desirable benefit, and an inevitable response all coalesce into either the headline or the one sentence that makes up your big idea. Now, in copywriting, especially direct response copywriting, your headline typically is your big idea. So you've got it easy. You can throw that thing up there as your headline, and people immediately understand what you're trying to convey in your piece, and then you just elaborate in the rest of your sales copy. But with brand advertising, it gets a little more difficult because you have to play on a bunch of words and, you know, use a bunch of your space wisely, things like that. We have the benefit of having long copy where we get to explain our big idea, but it still has to follow these techniques: good idea, core emotion, captivating story, single desirable benefit, and inevitable response, ideally into one sentence, but definitely into just one headline. Let's look at a couple other ones. To men who want to quit work someday. Every man's dream is to retire and provide for his family and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of them have the fear that they're never going to be able to quit work because they don't have enough of a retirement built up. How a new discovery made a plain girl beautiful. This hits on a good idea, a new discovery that has come out. They're going to explain how, and they're appealing to one of the fears of many women, which is that they feel plain or they feel unattractive, and that there's a new discovery that can make them beautiful. The next one is how I improved my memory in one evening. Many people who deal with memory issues, or many people who have an urgent need to improve their memory, don't want to rely on a long, lengthy process. They want to improve it quickly. Either they need to improve their memory because it's failing right now, and they're getting older for whatever reason their memory is failing, or perhaps they're a student or they're someone whose memory matters in their job, so they need to improve their memory immediately. That's the good idea. That's the core emotion, captivating story, the single desirable benefit, and the inevitable response, which most of the time is, I'm going to try this out, and into one sentence. Let's look at some more modern ones. I grabbed a couple of these from financial copy, but they're everywhere. And I'm pretty sure that if you haven't heard of them specifically, you can guess what they are just by reading them. Now, the end of America is a big idea that brought in almost $100 million worth of subscribers for Stansberry Research. Stansberry Research is currently the biggest arm of Agora Financial. So they brought in a ton from this. This is also what put their copywriter, Mike Palmer, on the map, the End of America promotion. So the End of America obviously being a good idea that their demographic latches onto. They think that their demographic thinks that America is going to hell in a handbasket, and all of a sudden they see one of their favorite financial publishers come out with this, which is the End of America, and the long 45 to an hour long VSL that came after it. So good idea, core emotion, you know, something that is really appealing to them just with this one sentence, the End of America. The next one also subsequently comes from Stansberry Research. They're really, really good. There is a railroad across America. This appeals to the historical context of the reader because the reader knows that the last time a railroad was built around across America, it created essentially the titans of industry. It created most of the wealthy multi-generational families that currently exist. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgan and Chase, Dale Carnegie. The railroad built America and built all of those fortunes. And so by linking that context from that target market into the piece, they immediately create that intriguing sense of greed where, oh goodness, I really have to get on this new railroad that is being built across America. The next one, I'm going to let you see if you can figure it out. 90 days, no gym, real results. Yes, it's 3 sentences, but it's also shorter than the previous one. So 90 days, no gym, real results. What do you think it is? If you guessed P90X, you're correct. P90X is one of the most successful direct response workout programs in recent memory. P90X is crushing it, continues to absolutely crush it, and Beachbody, the company that owns P90X and also owns Insanity, which is hilarious because they compete with each other, and also owns a ton of other health offers, is extremely good at nailing this big idea. P90X went for the hardcore, but it also went for the people who are ready to work hard but don't really consider themselves insane necessarily. They just consider themselves hardworking, whereas Insanity went with the people who really like to work their butts off and would be fine calling themselves insaniacs. And so the different target market shows you the different types of big ideas that are created. The next one is a VSL called The Lost Ways, which is an offer for a survival guide, a survival book. The Lost Ways appeals to the survival market because many of the survival market are also in the homesteading market, the self-sufficiency, self-reliance market, things like that. And those types of people have a lot of respect for older methods, older like pioneer days type stuff where the real rubber met the road and people knew how to take care of themselves. And so this concept of the lost ways is super intriguing to them because for them, it is a good idea that appeals to a core emotion, which is not only nostalgia, but also a appeal to nature and an appeal to like the past and how the past is better. The captivating story is in the title. It's called The Lost Ways. Why were they lost? Why did we find them again? It's a compelling story. The single desirable benefit is very clear. Once you learn the lost ways, then you will have forbidden knowledge or lost knowledge. Very, very clear there. And one inevitable response. I need to get this book because it's the only place that teaches about this stuff. Again, in one sentence or less. So these are the examples that we're talking about. We're going to get to when to use a big idea real quick, but then we're going to go back and teach you about basically the 4 pieces to the big idea that you need to use if you are going to use a big idea. The first one is big enough to stir interest. Now, the implied task there is that it can't be too big to make people skeptical or to make people go, yeah, right, whatever. It needs to be big enough to stir people's interest, like We Try Harder or The Lost Ways or The End of America. In this case, apocalyptic copy works well in financial copy. Big enough to stir interest. The next part is easy to understand. Your big idea must be easy to understand. There is no way around it. If it's hard to understand, if it's unclear, if it can't be immediately understood by your target market, then it is not a big idea because it needs more refinement. Maybe it's too complicated. Maybe it doesn't grasp the core enough. Whatever it happens to be, it must be easy to understand. And that's just in clarity of writing. That's just in clarity of word usage, things like that. The next part is immediately convincing. So not only is it big enough to stir interest, and not only is it easy to understand, but it must be immediately convincing, which means that once they hear that sentence, they can't go bullshit. They can't say no way. They must immediately be convinced that there is a potential for that statement to be true. They must be immediately convinced. So with the End of America piece, they were immediately thinking, the end of America? Well, I know America's pretty bad, and I know I don't like a lot of what's happening in America, but this guy's saying the end of America? I must immediately find out what he's saying, because this could be very big. When someone says the lost ways, you're essentially telling them that what you're about to give them was lost to history but has now been found. That is immediately convincing to the target market. We Try Harder is immediately convincing. Pork, the other white meat, is immediately convincing. How to get people to like you, the secret to making people like you is immediately convincing. So make sure that your one big idea immediately convinces the audience. And so that obviously follows up with clearly useful. So clearly being easily understood and useful, meaning immediately convincing, clearly useful to the reader, to the prospect, to the audience, whoever it happens to be. These 4 are your litmus test for a big idea. Big enough to stir interest, easy to understand, immediately convincing, and clearly useful. If your big idea meets all 4 of those criteria, you are ready to move on. So make sure that it matches those things, and also incorporate what we talked about here. Good idea, core emotion, captivating story, single desirable benefit, and inevitable response, ideally into one sentence, and then run it through this test. Big enough to stir interest, easy to understand, immediately convincing, and clearly useful to the reader. Those are the techniques and some examples on how to create a big idea. Like I said, very, very strategic, and I didn't give you a template here, and I didn't give you any sort of like specific do this, do that, because big ideas are always different, and they have to be different from each other and from previous big ideas, because those big ideas that came before them already worked, and they're not going to work again. You can't duplicate a big idea. It doesn't work. So they have to be different, they have to be unique, they have to be intriguing, and that's part of the difficulty with a big idea, because anytime someone tries to create a formula for one, that formula is immediately non-usable, because the marketplace sees it once, sees it twice, and doesn't accept it anymore. So be very, very careful of templates that say a big idea is a specific template. Let's talk about when to use a big idea, because I think this is an important concept. When to use a big idea is really key. If somebody just paid you $100 to write some emails, they probably don't deserve a big idea. The amount of work and the amount of back and forth and the amount of testing and the amount of understanding of the target market that is necessary to create a big idea, a true big idea, not some bullshit one that a client comes up with off the top of their head, but a true big idea, is extremely difficult. And that's why not many people do it. That's why most marketing doesn't have one. So when to use one is really a question for the copywriter. I mean, if somebody's paying you a small amount of money, do they really deserve for you to put your effort into finding a big idea for their piece? And my personal opinion is no. If they're charging you, or if you're charging them a very small amount of money, small project, they don't deserve a big idea. So this is when I would use it. Is the project trying to make 6+ figures in whatever it's trying to do? Whether it's an evergreen product, whether it's a launch, whatever it's trying to do, are they trying to make at least 6 figures in revenue? Ideally, much, much more than that. If they can pass that criteria, maybe they're ready for a big idea. Does the client have the traffic already in excess of 1,000 clicks per day? This is going to be harder for a lot of clients. Not a lot of clients can send this type of traffic. Why do I say that they need that kind of traffic? Because a big idea, regardless of how much research you do on the front end, must be tested enough to be verified or to be invalidated. If you test it enough and it holds true and it converts really well on this big idea, this concept, then you need enough data passing through that to legitimately say, okay, yes, this is absolutely a great big idea. Let's keep running this. If not, the market's going to tell you whether or not it works. Because if your big idea stinks and you run 1,000 clicks per day to the offer, you have very good data on the fact that it stinks. But if you only send 100 clicks, you have no idea if that big idea is good or not. Even if it didn't convert, you have no idea if it's really a bad idea. So the next one is the market crowded, weird, niche, or brand new? If yes, if the answer is yes to any one of these things, and they meet the previous 2 criteria, then they're in a good spot for a big idea. Crowded, you need a big idea. Weird, you need a big idea. Niche, you need a big idea. And brand new, you absolutely need a big idea. If they can launch it at 6 figures or over and they can send 1,000 clicks per day, because you need the data and you need the size in order to justify the research. Next one, if the market is small, unsophisticated, and extremely rabid, there's a typo, extremely rabid, i.e. rare, then you probably don't need a big idea. So if the market is small, then you don't need a big idea because there's not a lot of competition and there's not a lot of noise in the marketplace. Same thing with unsophisticated. If the marketplace is unsophisticated and hasn't been exposed to a lot of advertising yet, you don't really need a big idea, because the big idea can simply be, here's the product, or the product does this. So for unsophisticated marketplaces, stage 1, stage 2 type marketplaces, you typically don't need a big idea, unless you're competing with a hyper-sophisticated marketplace that is really close to what you're operating in. So let's say you are in the fat loss niche for juvenile diabetics, right? So let's say a kid with juvenile diabetes needs to lose 50 pounds and you're in that niche. Well, that niche is relatively unsophisticated. Now, there's not a lot of products out there that teach, 12-year-old kids with type 2 diabetes how to lose weight. But there's a lot of products out there that try to help diabetics lose weight. So be very careful when you're looking at those markets that are surrounding your market. So don't automatically think that it's just unsophisticated, therefore it doesn't need a big idea. The next one, the last one, is extremely rabid or rare. So when a market is rabid, as in they will consume and consume and consume no matter what, then you don't need a big idea. You basically just need to, what I call, toss the meat in, which is, imagine that your market is a lake full of piranhas. All you really need to do is throw your offer in there and they'll devour it immediately. So if the kind of market that you have, think of, right now, off the top of my head, I can't think of too many rabid marketplaces, but an example of a rabid marketplace would probably, like markets that really can't control how much they buy. You're looking at addiction type markets. You're looking at potentially, drug dealers don't really have to have a big idea when they sell cocaine. You're looking at gambling. Like, you don't need a big idea to sell gambling, right? You just simply say, here's how to gamble. Here's a thing that you can gamble with. Those types of markets don't require a big idea. Again, you're probably not going to be operating in those types of markets unless you choose to, and you won't really be dealing with them much. But keep that in mind. If it's a rabid market and the marketplace is just eating everything up, then just toss the meat in. The next one is, does the client have previous data on successful or non-successful pieces? Now, if you're launching something brand new, this won't be the case, obviously. But if they have a business, they've already made money, they can send the traffic, they should have data on what was successful and what was not successful. So when you look at that data, like emails that got sent and didn't get opened, sales pages they ran and didn't get any clicks, you can take that and take a look and go, this did have a big idea or did not have a big idea, and it worked or didn't work. That previous data is going to give you a wealth of information, because you'll be able to basically test without testing. You're going to look and see, oh, well, they ran a piece that had my same idea and it didn't do very well. Now, again, take it with a grain of salt, because it might have not been the right time or whatever, but having that previous data is really going to help you in verifying whether or not your big idea is going to work. Let's talk about some cautionary things. I already talked about the last one here, which is beware of formulas. You don't want to go to the reduction to formulaic at this point, but let's talk about the first two. One big idea means you got one chance, and you have to be able to test it. So if you're picking one big idea for your piece, and you're sticking with that big idea throughout the piece, then when you test that big idea, you've got to be ready to say, okay, it worked or it didn't work based on the testing. And you've got to be okay with the fact that you can put a lot of effort into something and not have it hit the marketplace in the right way. So when you do have a big idea, I know it's part of the research, it's part of the scariness of launching copywriting, but the benefits to sticking to one idea and obeying the rule of one will outweigh any additional testing that you have to do to find what that big idea is. Because the worst thing you want to do is bury a really good big idea into a piece that doesn't have a good big idea and has a bunch of ideas, and then have it do mediocre. Because you'll never know which one of the ideas actually works. Therefore, you'll never really have a giant winner. You got to be willing to fail first in order to get these big wins. And be prepared to test. The second thing is, big ideas only work once. And they only work for a period of time. So big ideas only work once because when a big idea hits, it's new, it's different, it's unique. It hits on all those points we talked about earlier. So once it does that, though, then the big idea is now just common knowledge. Now it's just something that everybody knows in the marketplace. And even though they're buying this thing and they're going through all this marketing and they really appreciate it, eventually they're not going to believe it's a big idea anymore. It's just going to be common knowledge. And it only works for a period of time because the marketplace moves quick and competitors move quick. So your big idea, especially nowadays, might absolutely crush it. But there's a reason why Stansberry Research is not still using The End of America, because it didn't continue to work. It worked really, really well for about a year, which is crazy nowadays, but eventually even it stopped working, and that's why they don't run it anymore. So your big idea with all this research is designed to give you a competitive edge. It is not designed to create a be-all, end-all. And that is where I'm going to end the big idea training. If you have any questions about big ideas, or you want to run by some concepts in your copy or in your pieces, let me know in the question and answer webinar. Other than that, have a wonderful day.